All right, well, thanks for coming out tonight, and like I said earlier, for staying so long. Thanks to Mark and East Texas Right to Life for having me out tonight to share with you a few things. Really appreciated two talks we had earlier, and really happy to be here. And I live all the way down in the Houston area. I live in Dayton, so it's about 3 or 4 hours from here. One of the things that struck me tonight, and struck me as we were talking about this event and kind of what we were trying to do here, there are lots of commands that the Bible gives us of what we have to do as Christians. And kind of the three categories that I like to put them in with regards to the subject of tonight. When it comes to people who are abortion-minded or thinking about giving up their children, we have to assist them. That would be the first thing we should do. If they need our help, if they need to, if they want to put their baby up for adoption, or they need help with clothing needs or material needs, we are to help them, right? What does James say about what is true and undefiled religion? To visit orphans and widows in their affliction. Who is not more an orphan than a child who is being given up for adoption or perhaps being aborted? So we are to help children in their time of need, and we are to help the mothers in their time of need. So we are to assist them. The second thing that we are to do, this is just another A word, okay, so bear with me, agitation. Now you may say, wait a minute, agitation? Why would we agitate them? Well, a lot of times when you preach to them on the street, you're going to agitate them. In fact, sometimes that's what you want to do. Sometimes you need to agitate them out of their state so that they will be ready to hear. That's where the law of God, as Christine talked about earlier, that's where it comes in. Sometimes the law of God can be very agitating. But there's one other thing that God's Word tells us to do as Christians, right? We are to help those in need, orphans and widows. We are to preach the Word of God. We are to do those things. But what if our laws in the land are wrong? Are we to stay at home? Are we to be silent on that matter? No, there's a third thing that we are to do as Christians, and that is we are to seek justice. And that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. I'm with an organization called Abolish Abortion Texas, and we work in the political realm. A lot of who I speak to, this is my first college group, if you will, to speak to. Most of the places that I go are going to be your local Republican Party meetings in a county, or your local Tea Party groups. I'm going to go speak to those people. And the reason I do that is because, and I kind of start off with these 4 questions I'm about to ask you. The reason I do that is because a lot of people who are involved politically, they're involved politically because they want to change the laws with regards to abortion in this state. And so one of the ways you can do that is to go and be involved in your local Republican Party. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about what's going on in our state with regards to pro-life legislation. So we're going to be talking about 2 things tonight. I'm going to be comparing and contrasting pro-life, what I'm going to call pro-life regulationism, and I'm going to be comparing that to abolitionism. Okay, and I am an abolitionist, and that means that I seek the full and complete abolition of abortion, totally, and to make it a criminal act, okay? That's what abolitionism is. And I'm going to compare and contrast these 2 things. But first, I want to do a quick little poll. Show of hands. How many of you would call yourself pro-life? That's kind of an easy one, right? I rarely talk to a group of people where someone doesn't raise their hand. How many of you support pro-life organizations? Okay. How many of you think that the words pro-life mean that we should abolish abortion immediately? So when you hear the words pro-life, you think, yeah, that means we're seeking to end abortion, right? Okay. How many of you think, it's the last question, how many of you think that the pro-life organizations that you are supporting are also trying to do that? It's always interesting to see the last question because people are like, I'm not actually sure. Right. And that's interesting, right? Like if we think that pro-life means end abortion, shouldn't the organizations we support also want to end abortion? And shouldn't they be seeking that? So that's why I'm juxtaposing these two things, because tonight we're going to talk about what's going on in our legislature with regards to pro-life legislation. And I'm going to be talking about why I think pro-life regulationism is wrong. Well, what is regulationism? Well, regulationism, when it comes to legislation that we pass as law in Texas, it's incremental, okay? It does not seek immediately to say, okay, abortion's criminal right now. It doesn't do that. You'll hear things, and we'll talk about this some more as we proceed, but it seeks to limit abortions by doing certain things. Like, let's say we would just prevent abortions after 20 weeks or something like that. When I say incremental, that's what I mean. They're seeking to chip away at the law to change it gradually to then finally be that ending of abortion state, okay? It regulates murder, okay? It regulates who you can murder. It regulates what murder is, when you can do it, where you can do it, how you can do it, and even why you can do it. Sometimes you can kill a child if they have Down syndrome. Sometimes you can't, right? Oh, if they don't have Down syndrome, you're not allowed to choose that. There's a why component to this. It actually treats abortion as health care. Do you know where all the abortion laws are in the Texas Code of Laws? They're in Health and Services, Health and Human Services. That's the health care section. Abortion in Texas is health care. Pro-life regulationism, it allows for exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. So these are pro-life organizations put forth bills that allow for abortion if it's in the case of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. Pro-life regulationism seeks to reduce the number of abortions. Okay? They just are trying to save the most number of children possible. And finally, and this is something we're going to dwell on a little bit later, it complies with unjust decrees. So the way I like to talk about this is if we wanted to end abortion right now in Texas, and we wanted to put forward a bill that said abortion's done with, it's illegal, and if you do it, it's murder, and you're a criminal, right? If we wanted to do that, what would prevent us from doing that? Anybody? What would prevent us from making abortion illegal today? Who would come in and tell us you can't do that? Supreme Court. Why can't we do it? Because the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court what? Well, they've decreed you must allow abortions in your state. Roe versus Wade. I'm sure you've heard of that, right? Roe versus Wade says that a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion. That's what it says. And Texas, you must allow that. So in short, regulationism, it doesn't treat abortion as what it truly is. What is abortion? It's murder. It uses pragmatism as its main driver. We're going to get what we can. Look, we just can't make it criminal in this political climate. It's just not time yet, right? It's inconsistent. Now, on the one hand, it says abortion is murder, but we're going to do it when in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother. Well, if it's murder, is it murder in those cases too? If it is, you're saying that you're going to allow murder in those cases. It's inconsistent. So a little background. So these are the statutes in Texas that talk about what murder is and what a person is. This is the chapter, rather. Chapter 19, Texas Penal Code, deals with homicide. It's the homicide chapter. And Texas Penal Code 1902 says that murder is, quote, intentionally or knowingly causing or causes the death of an individual. Someone commits an offense of murder if they intentionally or knowingly cause the death of an individual. Well, that's good. That makes sense, right? Everybody can agree with that. If you intentionally kill someone, and they're an innocent person, they're not attacking you, right? Then that is murder. Well, what is an individual? Well, if you jump over to the other section of the Penal Code, 1.07, it defines an individual as a human being who is alive, including an unborn child, at every stage of gestation from fertilization until birth. That's law today. So are preborn children included in that? Yes. Is abortion murder? Yes. Is it murder by statute? Yes, it is. In Texas, today. Great, we're done. Abortion's murder, right? It's outlawed. It's done, right? So what's the difference here? So Abolish Abortion Texas, the organization I work with, began when we found out what I'm about to tell you. You have to read on. Again, Chapter 19, Criminal Homicide, Texas Penal Code 19.06. It specifically excludes unborn children from the protection of the statutes we just read if the murder is permitted as long as the baby is killed by the child's mother or her abortionist. That's 1906. That is there today. Okay. When do you think this was added? 70s? Okay. I mean, the first two are great, right? We can all agree with that. That's a great definition of murder, and that is a great definition of an individual. It includes preborn children. Fantastic. When was 1906 added? It was actually added in 2003. Added in 2003. And you might think to yourself, well, maybe it was 1906 that was added in 2003. No, actually, it was both of those things. All three of those things were added in 2003 by the Texas legislature. Now, you might think to yourself, well, maybe they were added separately in 3 separate bills or 2 separate bills. No, they were added in the same exact bill. And you might then think to yourself, well, I'm sure the first 2, that was pro-lifers, right? And that third thing, oh, that was those Democrats. That was those pro-aborts, pro-choicers. They added that on, right? Would it surprise you if I told you that these are the 2 organizations that championed that addition to the law? It was called the Prenatal Protection Act. You can look it up. It's on their website. They talk about it. Now, their intentions for doing this were actually good. The Prenatal Protection Act, it sought to protect children in the womb. And that's why we have the first 2 sections. The first 2 parts were beefed up a little bit. They did not include, individual did not include preborn child. But now it does, and that's good. But they added the bottom part. Why? Why did they add the bottom part? And what they were trying to do as Prenatal Protection Act, let's say in Texas, a woman who was pregnant was assaulted by a person that sought to injure her. Let's say she was killed, and her preborn child was also killed. That is now a double homicide because of that law right there. And that's good. But why the 1906? Now remember what I said earlier. It complies with unjust decrees. They added that language because the way they think tactically about pro-life law is that we must comply with what the Supreme Court says. We must comply with what the Supreme Court has decreed. Now, what the Supreme Court has done is not law, right? They've issued an opinion about what we as Texas should do. And if you weren't familiar with Roe versus Wade, that was actually a Texas case. Someone took Texas to the Supreme Court and said that they were basically not treating them properly, and they went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, you know what, you're right. Your law is not correct here, and we want you to change it. We're going to strike down that law, and we'll talk a little bit about what that law specifically was towards the end. All right, let's move on, because we're going to come back to this subject. Some other examples of regulationism. So complying with unjust decrees, we're going to make our law where actually abortion is codified for the first time in 2003. In our law, you can have an abortion and we will not prosecute you. That's regulationism. Mandating special insurance coverage. Mandating special reporting. This is 2 quotes from Governor Abbott, Republican governor, pro-life governor. As a firm believer in Texas values, I am proud to sign this legislation that ensures that no Texan is ever required to pay for a procedure that ends the life of an unborn child. This bill prohibits insurance providers from forcing Texas policyholders to subsidize elective abortions. I am grateful to the Texas legislature for getting this bill on my desk and working to protect innocent life in this special session. This just happened. This is a quote from the previous special session. This happened last year. Now, I don't want to be mandated to cover abortions in my insurance, but that's not pro-life, is it? That's not being against abortion. That's just being against maybe welfare, or that's just being against the government telling businesses what they can and can't do, or telling them you must allow, you as an insurance policyholder, you must pay for this, and you didn't want to pay for this. That's not pro-life, because that's not actually seeking to end abortions, is it? Which is what we all said, that's what pro-life means to us, right? We want to end abortions now. Mandatory reporting. The health and safety of women. Listen to this quote. This is Governor Abbott again. The health and safety of women is of the utmost importance, and we must have the most accurate data available in order to create good policy. This bill is an important step toward providing Texas with critical information when abortions are performed. I would like to thank the Texas legislature for ensuring this important legislation reached my desk during this special session. This is a Republican pro-life governor saying that he is going to sign into law restrictions against abortions in the form of we're going to have more accurate reporting. Why would you need more accurate reporting? Well, so you can make abortions safer for women, right? Safe, legal, and rare. You all remember that idea? Who said the safe, legal, and rare? Anybody remember? All right, now, in a normal presentation where my computer was connected there, you'd hear a YouTube video right now. So I'm going to play you a YouTube video from my laptop at full volume. Hopefully you can hear this.
We can support a woman's right to choose that makes abortion safe, legal, and rare, and reduces the number of abortions.
The only reason you regulate abortion to mandate special reporting is if that's how you think. If you actually want to make abortion safe, legal, and rare, but not get rid of it. You can continue killing babies, but not through our medical insurance. Yay, victory, right? Is that a victory? Do you consider that a victory? I'm going to ask you that a lot tonight. Let's move on. So some other examples of regulationism. Dignified burials. So I actually went to the hearing for this bill last session and spoke against it. And here's the brief purpose of what this bill was about. It says, the preamble to the bill said that this purpose of this chapter is to express the state's profound respect for the life of the unborn by providing for a dignified disposition of embryonic and fetal tissue remains. Basically, we care about preborn children so much that when you slaughter them, we're going to require you to give them a dignified burial. Okay? Now, I guarantee you, most people in Texas, their House of Representatives, their state rep, and their senator probably voted for this bill. And I guarantee you, they came back to all the local Republican clubs and all the local fundraisers and talked about how pro-life they were because they signed that bill. Now, does that seek to save any children? Does that seek to end abortions? Is that good enough? How about a partial birth abortion ban? Asterisk. Actually still allows for partial birth abortions in some cases. And even when the abortionist commits the partial birth abortion, even if he's just a scofflaw and says, oh, I'm just going to do this anyway, it's a state jail felony. It's like a fine and less than 90 days in prison. Incidentally, killing a cat in Texas is also a state jail felony. But the Texas legislature this session actually made the penalty for killing a feline more jail time, like a 5-year state jail felony penalty, and then they reduced the sentence for children. So if you perform, as an abortionist, a partial birth abortion, you will spend less time in jail than if you kill a cat. Dismemberment abortion ban. We're going to talk about that for a minute. What do you think of when you hear the words dismemberment abortion ban? If there was a bill that called itself the dismemberment abortion ban, what do you think it would do? Well, you think it would end dismemberment abortions, right? It would stop them. That's not actually what it does. But the people who authored this bill are grateful that that's what you think. So first off, it doesn't ban dismemberment abortions in the cases of emergency. So we have the life of mother exception. And it also does not ban the dismemberment abortion if the child is already dead. Okay? Now, what is a dismemberment abortion ban? It's also commonly called a D&E, which is a dilation and extraction. We're dealing with an abortion which first dismembers the child, and then, so we're talking about a child who is too large to remove without dismemberment, okay? So they first dismember the child and while alive, traditionally, and then they take each piece out individually because they can't get it out otherwise unless they actually do a full birth, okay? So what this bill actually tried to do, so not in cases of emergency, and it's still allowed, and not if the child is already dead. You might think that that's an interesting loophole. Now, you're right, it is an interesting loophole because that's actually what they designed it to do, okay? So I was there in the Senate when they were defending this bill during a hearing and talking about what it did and what it did not do. And the author of this bill, who spoke for it in the Senate, said, let me be clear, and I'm not going to quote him here, but what he was saying was, this bill does not prevent anyone from getting an abortion. The only thing that this bill requires is that the child be killed first and then dismembered. Okay? That was the purpose of this law. Now, you may not believe me, and that's okay. So this came out of this last session as the bill SB 8. SB stands for Senate Bill number 8. And you probably can't read that up at the top left there, but I can hand it to you later if you want to read it. But this is all available online. This is how Texas defended this in court. So it was immediately went to court, okay? So some pro-choice organization, pro-abortion organization said, we can't stand that. We can't have any attacks upon abortion. We're going to sue them in Texas court. It's going to go to Texas court. Texas has to send a lawyer to defend it. This is what the Office of the Attorney General is supposed to do. This is how Texas defended this SB 8 ban. It said SB 8 is not a ban on D&E. This is exact quotes. SB 8 would not bar a single woman in Texas from receiving an abortion. Not one. SB 8 reflects the ethos of a humane and civilized society. SB 8 would require one thing, a humane termination of an unborn child's life before it is dismembered and evacuated. That is all it does. Okay, are you with me? Is that what you think of when you think of defending life? Is that what you think of when you think of God telling us to establish justice? Is that justice? Our laws regulate murder. Another one, fetal heartbeat abortion ban goes too far. Now I bring this one up because there's a lot of people who are pro-life who would say, all right, a heartbeat ban, that's really great, right? Because a heartbeat is detectable very early in a pregnancy. And so if you had a ban that banned abortions after a detectable heartbeat, you would eliminate a lot of the percentage of abortions. Now, I'm actually against a heartbeat ban, and I will go into that hopefully a little later if we have time. But for the sake of argument, this seems like a pretty good idea because it would get rid of a lot of abortions, right? So Ohio actually did pass a bill in their state legislature back in 2016, I believe, that was a ban on abortions after there was a detectable fetal heartbeat ban. Now, it was vetoed by their governor. And this is what he said about it. He vetoed it at the direction of someone. Someone told him that you need to veto that. Now, who do you think that was? It was Ohio Right to Life. Ohio Right to Life asked Governor Kasich on Monday to veto the bill. Kathleen Franklin, a spokeswoman for Ohio Right to Life, said in an email her group backs the 20-week abortion ban instead of the fetal heartbeat ban. Both are what you would call pre-viability bans, but we believe the 20-week ban is the best strategy for overturning Roe versus Wade. And listen to this. This is key. And will ultimately prove most palatable to the Supreme Court. Most palatable to the Supreme Court, she said. It's not just the Ohio strategy, but the national strategy. And she's right. That is the national strategy for all of the affiliated Right to Life groups. Most palatable. Remember what I said earlier? What is pro-life regulationism? It complies with unjust decrees. Okay? Roe versus Wade, as far as they're concerned, we have to comply with that. We can't say no. We have to write our laws such that we are being most palatable to what the Supreme Court wants. And what do we hear from the pro-life movement? I hear this constantly from people in the pro-life organizations that I talk with. We're winning. We're winning. Does that sound like winning to you? Because it doesn't sound like winning to me. And when I found a lot of this out, I was shocked and appalled. Now, they definitely are winning something. They're definitely fundraising. And your representatives will come to you and talk about how pro-life they are and talk about how you should support them for their campaigns and give your money towards them. But I don't call that victory. If you call that victory, then your standard is different than mine. But what we have to do is ask the question, will these incremental steps that they're using, will they actually do more harm than good? Do you know what happens when you regulate an industry? When you regulate an industry and you put more requirements upon that industry, what happens is, I hope you're learning this in your economics classes, the smaller companies in an industry, they can't comply with the steeper and steeper regulations because they don't have enough market share. They're small business. Small businesses get hurt by overregulation. In fact, it actually leads larger companies to spend a lot of their money lobbying Congress to increase regulations so they can actually not have to compete with the mom and pop businesses, if you will, small businesses, because they want them to go out of business. You see that all over. So it is just an economic fact. When you regulate an industry, the big guys benefit and the small guys get pushed out. This is Planned Parenthood's percentage of abortions. Despite 40-something years of pro-life regulations, their abortions are rising. The percentage of abortions. They're getting more and more people getting abortions at their facilities as they continue. They're having no problems at all complying with all of these regulations that we're adding. And not only that, the revenue is going up. They're making more money doing this than they did previously. Right? That's their market share. So are our incremental laws, are they actually doing good or are they doing harm? So let's take a breath for a moment. Here's why that approach to ending abortion is wrong. This is the child sacrifice tree. You see, abortion is just a fruit of this tree, right? As we heard earlier in the other presentation, abortion is sin, but it's sin compounding upon other sin, right? I forget the statistic you quoted, but it was very, very high. Most abortions are being sought as a result of either fornication or adultery. Abortion is sin. It is deep-rooted in sin. All of these, the fornication itself comes from sin, and then the murder, the abortion, comes after it to cover up the sin of the fornication or the adultery. When we fail to treat abortion as murder in our legislation or by compromising our principles, it actually does more harm than good. That's my conviction, and I hope to show you how. How do we deal with sin? That's the sin. Those are the individual sins that come after abortion, right? Infanticide, reproduction technologies. Do you know how many, just a quick little tangent, during fertility treatments, when they create children to be implanted into people who have trouble with fertility, you know they usually create lots of different embryos, and they pick the most optimal ones, the ones most likely to survive as they can tell. And do you know what they do with the rest? They either cryogenically freeze them or they discard them. Okay? Fertility treatments kill a lot of people too. They're just people in the embryonic stage of human development. Abortifacients. Do you know where your nearest abortion provider is, Mark? Walmart. Yes. CVS. Walgreens. That's your nearest abortion provider. You can walk in. Get it over the counter. But that's all fruit. That comes from the tree. How do you deal with sin? Do you snip away at it? Right? How do you deal with adultery? Do you only stop cheating on your spouse a little bit? Right? You go from once a week to once a month? No, that's not how we deal with sin. You cut the tree down. That's how you deal with sin. Abortion is sin. The only answer for sin is the gospel. What this requires is repentance. And right now, our laws don't even take that into account. They leave the Bible at the door when they talk about legislation dealing with abortion. Let's look at a few scripture passages here. Jeremiah 6. I won't read the whole things here for sake of time. But he's talking about, Jeremiah is talking about the prophets and the priests. What do they say? They have done things that have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. We're winning. We're winning. There's peace. This is great. We're moving forward, right? Please donate. Isaiah 10, 1. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, the writers who keep writing oppression, to turn aside the needy from justice, and to rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be their spoil, and that they may make the fatherless their prey. This is a judgment passage. I won't read the whole thing, but it goes on to talk about what are you going to do when God comes for you? That's what it says. Oh, and justice. This is what I was talking about earlier. That widows, turning aside the needy from justice. This is why I talk about establishing justice. Establishing justice, it's one of the things that we are to do. And not only that, if you don't, God brings judgment against you for failing to establish justice. That's very important. Leviticus 20 says, God says, my face is against the man who gives his children to Molech. God hates child sacrifice. We would all agree with that. Of course he does. Of course God hates child sacrifice. And he should, and we should be glad about that. But that's not what he's just condemning in this passage. There's an and. And not only do I hate child sacrifice, and my face is against the man who does it, but if the people of the land close their eyes, then I set my face against the clan, the whole people. So not only does God hold accountable the man or the men who give their children in sacrifice to a false god, perhaps let's say a false god of self, right? I'm too busy for this child right now. I don't have time for this. I'm just not at a proper stage of life. Not only does God hold them accountable, but the people who allow it to happen. If the people close their eyes, like the story of the Good Samaritan, and walk on by, right? They walk on by with their Bible, going to church. They close their eyes to this evil land. God's judgment is upon them too. And that, my friends, that is scary. Amos 5, what are we to do? We are to hate evil. We are to love good, and we are to establish justice at the gate. That's a command of God to His people. Establish justice. Well, what's the gate? Well, if you do a little bit of Bible study on this, where did Boaz go to for lack of a better way, to arrange the marriage with Ruth, right? The city gate. Why did he do that? That's where the elders were, right? That's where you could go and have a legal matter settled. He had his kinsmen come with him, and they had witnesses to witness the legal matter. That's where mercy and that's where justice were decided, is at the gate. So when it says establish justice at the gate, it's talking to the people who create the law of the land. This is a command to magistrates. This is a command to your state representatives, your senators. And since we elect them, it's a command to us too. Proverbs 24, rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to slaughter. And this is a big one, Acts 5:29. The Supreme Court says, you, Texas, cannot make murder, abortion, illegal. Who do we obey? God has said, thou shalt not kill, murder. Thou shalt not murder. Who do we obey? Do we obey God? Or do we obey Supreme Court? We're all Christians here, most likely. We all believe God is our source of authority. When God tells us to do something, we at least recognize, yes, we should obey that. Okay. If our answer to God about making murder, abortion, criminal is, I really want to do that, but I can't because the Supreme Court said I can't, then what have we made the Supreme Court? We've made it our authority. And who is your source of law? If your source of law is your authority, number one, but you have made that your God. That source of authority is your God. If God is here and the Supreme Court is here when it comes to jurisdiction, then this is your God, not this. Our answer should be, I'm sorry, if you can read this sign over here, SCOTUS is dead wrong. Ignore Roe. That's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be trying to whittle away at it a little bit at a time. We should say, no. No, we will not do that here. That should be our response. And so now I want to talk to you about abolition, which effectively is summed up in those words. No. Let's compare and contrast abolition versus regulationism. Abolition, it's not incremental, it's immediate. Okay? Now with regards to the laws that we would seek to pass would not say, everyone with a detectable heartbeat, you can't abort them, but before that, you can still abort them. No, we would not support that. We would never run that bill. It's immediate. And we'll talk about why. It doesn't regulate murder, it criminalizes it. If it's really a human, and killing an innocent human is really murder, then that is a criminal act, and it is just to make it so. We do not treat abortion as health care, we treat abortion as sin. If your law lies about what abortion is, and that's kind of what's going on, then you're basically saying, morally speaking, to a lot of people who think this way, Well, that's not really wrong. And you are cutting them off from the path of realizing that that is a sin that they need to repent of. You are robbing them of the opportunity to repent of that sin and receive forgiveness. That's what you're doing. And that's what we're doing. Abolitionism says no exceptions. No rape, no incest, no life of the mother exceptions. Why? Well, because two wrongs don't make a right. You, as was pointed out, you don't punish the child for the crime of the father. Right? No, you don't do that. That would be unjust. That would be injustice to do that. And when it comes to the life of the mother, you should seek to save both parties. You should not kill one. Right? If you have two people drowning and you can't save both of them, but you can only save one of them, well, you don't kill the other one. You do your best to save both. And sometimes you can't do that. But that's not murder. But shooting the other guy in the water you can't save, that is in fact murder. And that's what the life of the mother exceptions do. They say, oh, we're not even going to try to save the baby. Mainly, one of the big reasons is because it's a big liability. They would rather advise the woman to get an abortion now so they don't have to have any liability when it comes to, I'm sorry, I tried to save the baby, but I couldn't. And they're afraid of being taken to court over that. Isn't that ridiculous? So that's one of the reasons they advise that you would immediately have an abortion if the mother is sick or presumed to be sick. It seeks to establish justice. Abolition says, no, it's criminal. We need to seek that out, and nothing less than that. It doesn't seek to reduce abortions. That's not the highest goal, is not to reduce abortions. Now, we think that by ending all abortion and making it criminal, we will, in fact, reduce the most abortions, right? But that's not actually what we're seeking to do. We're seeking to honor God, right? What is the chief end of man? To glorify God. You guys should know this. To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That's one way of putting it, right? How do you glorify God? By loving Him and doing what He commands. What does God command? Establish justice for the weak. That is our top priority, faithfulness to God. When our laws are put forward that don't establish justice, then we are failing to love God. We are failing to bring glory to Him. That is worse. That is worse. So abolitionism, it defies the unjust decrees. We must obey God rather than man. That's what abolitionism says. We don't comply with the unjust decrees. Now why? Why is all this? Well, to summarize, because all humans are created in the image of God. Intentionally killing an innocent human being is murder. Murder is a crime. It's not an industry. We should not regulate the who, what, when, where of a crime. We should outlaw it. And since abortion is a crime, then legislating it as such and treating it as a crime is just. Denying equal protection or the humanity of unborn children, that is unjust. And that incurs the wrath of God. All right, so what about the Supreme Court? Well, the Supreme Court actually agrees in a way. Like I referenced earlier, and I'm sure you know, Roe versus Wade, that was a Texas case. That was a Texas law. They were attempting to strike down a Texas law. Abortion has been outlawed in various forms in Texas since the middle 1800s, actually. But here's the problem. Texas law in the 1800s did not treat abortion like murder, okay? Number one, the mother was never, if she was asking to have an abortion and she was seeking it out, she was never considered to be an accomplice to the act. And the Supreme Court in 1973, they point this out. It says, when Texas law urges that a fetus is entitled to the 14th Amendment protection, right? Equal protection of the law, that's the 14th Amendment. And they argue that it is a person, it faces a dilemma. So Texas faces a dilemma. If the fetus is a person, why is the woman not a principal or an accomplice? If the fetus is a person, why are the penalties different? So not only was the woman not considered an accomplice to the act of murder, but the penalty for her committing this abortion was not the same as the penalty for homicide, just like it is today with partial birth abortion. Preborn children are not considered the same class as born children. They're treated differently. They're different kinds of humans. So the reason Roe versus Wade happened in the first place is because Texas did not treat abortion as murder, and it did not treat the fetus as a human being. In short, it didn't treat abortion like sin. So what are we about here? Well, as I said earlier, we are seeking to establish justice. So we are actually an organization that is dedicated to putting forward bills that do meet what we believe to be God's standard for how we should treat abortion. We should treat it as murder. And so we do help to put forward bills and find them sponsors in the Texas House to treat abortion as it truly is. But this will only happen if we, the people of the sovereign state of Texas, demand the total and immediate abolition of abortion. And those bills we put forward, they must provide equal protection, and they must provide equal justice. And in order to do this, we must ignore Roe. Again, we're not whittling away at Roe. We're not dismembering Roe, as has been said. We are ignoring it. We must defy the Supreme Court in order for this to happen. Now, what does that look like? Well, it looks kind of like this. It looks a lot like preaching, right? This is Texas, so this is an Alamo reference, right? We've drawn a line in the sand. And what we're doing is we're asking our Republican legislators to move across that line. And we're asking them to repent, to do the right thing and end abortion. Because if we don't, God's judgment is coming for you. And that's what we tell them. We go in their offices and we tell them that. We tell them Isaiah 10, that woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees. That's them. God is pronouncing a woe upon them. And if you look at the scripture, when it talks about woes, that's judgment language. That means God's coming for you. You better straighten up. That's what that means. God does not take lightly when people do not establish justice for the weakest members of their society. So this poor elephant on the left here, he wants to come, he's a sad elephant. He wants to come across that line, but he's being held back. What is he being held back by? That little bitty stake. If you know anything about elephants, this is actually real. You can do this with an elephant, right? You can train a baby elephant to be held in by a stake in the ground that he could easily pull out when he's full grown. But he's been trained that he can't. He's not able to. I'll tell you more about that here in a second. So what does our organization do? This is our mission statement. Our mission is to abolish abortion in Texas by mobilizing Christians to influence civil government in obedience to the Great Commission. Your support helps us reach and mobilize more people, and mobilizing more people means more influence on the government to abolish abortion. You see, your legislators are in a pickle. I don't know if you know this. They want to do what you ask them to do. But here's the problem. There's a lot of other people who don't want them to do what you ask them to do, okay? And it's a lot of times a pretty even split. And they just want to do what you ask them to do because they don't want you to yell at them, right? But if they do what you ask them to do, there's other people who are going to yell at them, right? So here's what they've figured out. Here's the best way as a legislator to operate. You need to look like you're doing something while not actually doing anything at all. That's how to be an effective legislator. That's how to have a career as a legislator. Doesn't mean you're necessarily effective. And so that's why, if you'll hearken back to some of the regulationism we talked about earlier, that's why they put forward measures like the burial bill. Because they can go back to their district and they can talk about, look how pro-life I am, right? I required murdered children to be buried. Isn't that pro-life? And a lot of people will buy that and go, donate some money to that. Hey, look how pro-life he is. He voted for all these bills. Or they won't even ask. And they'll just assume that he's pro-life because he lists off a bunch of bills. So that's the pickle that they're in. And so they figured out that they can just do that. Because people will believe them. And so we exist as an organization to do a couple things. To tell people that they're doing that and to let people know when they do that. And in order for that to work, I need your help. And I'm going to ask you for help at the end of this presentation. We're about 2 or 3 slides away. So what have we done as an organization so far? Well, and when I say organization, please realize we're talking about a few people. This is really a grassroots movement. One of the things we did was we went to the Republican Party of Texas convention, and we got put on as a legislative priority. We advocated for and moved for a legislative priority that read like this: abolish abortion. We want the Texas legislature to abolish abortion by enacting legislation to stop the murder of unborn children, and to ignore and refuse to enforce any and all federal statutes, regulations, executive orders, and court rulings which would deprive an unborn child of the right to life. Now, a bill that follows those words would be a good bill, right? And that's what was on the Republican Party of Texas legislative priorities for 2016. And so we followed that up in the subsequent session with a bill sponsored by Representative Tony Tinderholt, who's out of Fort Worth. It's called the Abolition of Abortion in Texas Act. Now, it established equal justice, and it criminalized abortion. It repealed that 1906 section, those exemptions we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation. It repealed them such that abortion became punishable, right? It's already defined as murder, but repealing 1906 would make it where it would be punishable. It treated abortion as murder. And we supported that bill, and we rallied hundreds. And if you remember the first slide I showed you, we rallied over 1,000 people to Austin at a big rally to support the bill. But we need more help because you don't know who this guy is. This is Byron Cook. Now, Byron Cook has a committee. All right, now I'm going to, don't glaze over on me here for a second, because the Texas House is very detailed and very boring, and they have committees, and they have subcommittees, and they have subcommittees to the committees. And the Texas House is designed to kill bills. It is designed that way, and that's actually a good thing. We want that. But what happened was Byron Cook, because we don't want bad bills, right? There are a lot of bad bills, because there are a lot of Republicans and Democrats who put forward legislation that none of us would want, and we want to kill those things. So killing bills is not bad, but killing good bills is bad. What this man did, he refused to give our bill what's required. What's required for our bill? A hearing. We have to have a hearing in order to talk about the bill, and then it goes on to the next step. It's literally like the first step. He would not let our bill go to the very first step. He refused to give it a hearing. Now, this is a Republican, so-called. He refused to give the bill a hearing. Now, he gave Democrat allies a hearing. He gave a bill that called for more abortion freedom. He gave that bill a hearing. Again, guy who runs as a pro-life Republican gave abortion bills a hearing, would not give our bill a hearing. So what did we do? Well, we tried to apply pressure to him and try to urge him to please give our bill a hearing. We went to other hearings about pro-life bills, and we asked him at those hearings to please give our bill a hearing, and he wasn't too happy about us doing that. And we applied a lot of pressure, and he's no longer running. He actually dropped out. He's no longer a legislator. He had had enough. Now, I'm not saying that was because of what we did. But there were a lot of people, there were a lot of good Republican, conservative, liberty-minded bills that continued to get killed over and over and over again, having to do with abortion issues and lots of other issues. And this man was responsible for killing a lot of good bills. And that made him a very unliked man. And a lot of people gathered together and basically opposed him. And he quit. He did not run anymore. And that's good. We want that. If you have someone who opposes good legislation, you do want them to quit. And that, in short, is our strategy. What we need is you. We need you to help us. So one of the other things we did, you may have remembered when you voted back earlier this year, there was a Prop 7 to abolish abortion. That got about 68% of the vote. That was on the ballot. And We think there's enough people in Texas to make this happen. They just have to know it's going on. We think that most pro-life people, if they were to hear a lot of the things that I just shared with you tonight, that they would be appalled about that as much as we are. And I hope you are as well. And we think that there's enough of those sort of people that if we were to gather together and band together throughout Texas, that we could actually get a bill that criminalizes abortion passed. Okay? We think we could do that. Now, it's going to require replacing a lot of legislators. And that's going to take time. But it can be done. And what we need is people. So here's a zoom in on that graphic I referenced earlier. So can you read those letters now? What is this elephant being held back by? He thinks he's being held back by SCOTUS, right? Supreme Court. He thinks that Supreme Court is really big and really powerful, and he can't cross that line. But he can. He just doesn't know it yet. So plans for this year, well, a lot of them are already done, so I had to cross them off. But what's left for this year is we have the session coming up. 2019 begins the next legislative session. So you're about to vote next month. You could probably already vote if you're early voting. Once those elections are over, those people are installed into office, and then begins the session in early January, about the second week of January. So we'll have another bill. We'll have another bill like that HB 948 that I referenced earlier. It'll be a different number, but it'll be effectively the same bill with a couple small tweaks. So there will be a bill in the session that calls for treating abortion as murder and calls for equal justice and equal protection. And what we need is, we need people's help. So I've got a whole bunch of papers here, and I've got pens. Would you help me pass these out? So this is kind of our petition. Gives kind of a couple quick points. But what we need is people. Yeah, here. If we band together as people, I'm not asking for your money. I'm just asking for your email and your zip code. Because here's what we're going to do. When this next bill comes out and your local legislator here doesn't support it, let's just say he does it for instance, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you guys an email. And I'm going to say, hey, Senator such and such or Representative so-and-so, he's not supporting this bill. Now, if you support this bill, I want you to pick up your phone and I want you to call him or her. And I want you to let him know that he needs to support that. Guys, I have seen one phone call from an in-district person to their legislator switch their vote. One phone call. This actually happened last session with HB 948. There was a legislator who did sign it eventually, but he wasn't going to. He had told us no. And so I happened to know someone in his district. And I said, hey, just want to let you know, this person, whom we both know as your representative, and we know he claims to be pro-life, he refused to sign HB 948, the Abolition of Abortion Act. I just want to let you know that. It only took one email from that person letting him know what was going to happen if he didn't sign that bill, that he was going to email it out to the whole county and let them know that this pro-life guy was not going to sign this bill to make him sign it. So in-district people, just like you, making phone calls and sending emails, that's actually what's going to matter in the long run. And if we can do this across Texas, we can actually make this happen. So that's the end of the presentation. I thank you guys for your time.
The voice as strong as thunder will be heard across the land, calling to the magistrates to save our neighbor man, who wearing robes as black as sin have stained our soil red. The voice as strong as thunder will be felt across the land.